5 years down the line, let's say on cycling, I want to be able to cycle on a dedicated cycling lane in any part of Delhi.
I would really like to see the parking lot at the top left of the screen actually become a public space, because that's really where, the city has to be reclaimed for its people, not for vehicles. So I like to see those parking lots disappear, as many as possible.
More than just policy, we also need behavioral change from citizens. Who's going to stop that biker from coming onto the bike lane? The motorist from coming onto the bike lane. So there seems to me a big citizen campaign, citizen behavioral change campaign, as well as decision maker campaign, as Srini was also saying earlier, that kind of looks at shifting mindsets.
Interested in what the motors are in all of those vehicles. For me, I'd like to see 30% of those vehicles not having an internal combustion engine.
I'd also say that cycle tracks may not be possible everywhere, but certainly the city itself could be made cycling friendly, which is to reduce speeds all across. So, when we have slower speeds, it's much easier to coexist than when you have fast speeds. And I really would like to see no road deaths.
If you're talking about the Indian scenario, 2 and 3 wheelers, India runs on last mile, 2 and 3 wheelers. I don't see a 3 wheeler here. So shared mobility and first and last mile, I'd like to focus on that.
Basically looking at a 000 approach. So when I say 000, I mean 0 road traffic deaths or serious injuries. Then 0 emission, which is a lot of 0 emission vehicles, be it electric, hydrogen, or some of the other cleaner fuels. And then also looking at a 0 exclusion, which is a lot of effort on walking, cycling, shared transit, and public transport. So yeah, 0. So the 000 approach to me would work next 5 years.
So I think it's possible, just that one has to pay for one's way. So if we implement congestion pricing, for example, it's very much possible for people who would like to use their cars to use their cars, provided they're willing to pay for it. It is certainly going to dissuade a large number, but those who remain can travel rather well. And of course, you have the benefit of also earning a good deal of money to invest into the great footpaths that we want, the great cycling infrastructure that we want, and the public transportation we want.
Just adding to Avijit's point about making this look more like an Indian road, given the space that we have in many of our cities, particularly for Bombay, I don't know if you'd even have those 2 lanes for cars. So we'd need to find more compelling ways to get Rahul out of that car and into one of the other lanes if we wanted to do that. And so all of those pieces that we spoke about, the support infrastructure that's needed, I think, we'll need more of that and more of it, awareness and information around that for him.
Yeah, so the question that I heard was, that if Rahul wanted to use his personalized mode of transportation, then how would he do that? So I agree with the comments about ensuring that there are all sorts of travel measures. So whoever if he plans to use his car, he pays for it. But the other piece also is that, can we change his ambition? Like if we had campaigns which made him understand that he would still be, cool to actually ride an e-bike and come to his office space, maybe his ambition will change and he'll probably own an expensive bike and use that. So is that something that we can work on is another question that I'd add.
So Vinita already made the point that I wanted to. Rahul would be ideally persuaded to be working from home and doing this call. He seems precisely the kind of person who could change his behavior towards working from home for meetings.
As regards the whole deal with the automobile industry, we often do not see the subsidies that are inherent in whether it's setting up an automobile industry or in terms of the road space which is given for free to motor vehicles. We've done some calculations for Chennai over multiple years looking at the budgets, and we found that cars on an average get about 8 times more subsidy per trip than a bus passenger gets. And this is way more than the road tax that the car is paying right now. So I think it's important that we make the impact, the direct financial subsidy that the car industry gets more explicit, and rethink what the opportunity cost would be and how that money could have been spent somewhere else. There are cities in the world or countries in the world where they do not have as many cars per capita as we do even right now. And therefore, it's not necessary that we need to have so many cars per capita as if it's necessary in the development path of a country.
The reason why Salma is traveling in this mode is because this is the mode she can afford to. But then a lot more resources need to be put into this. And that is where the whole financial outlook of how public transport service providers in India are looked at par as any other utility, which means they need to provide their own revenues, and very often they need to break even at least, if not create profits. So bringing that entire paradigm to pump in more money from the personal mobility user to services like this, so that not just the quality is improved, but also the sheer availability and therefore the dignity of traveling in this.
Public transport mobility is the right to livelihood. So if the problem, I can speak for Bengaluru, is that and it's nice that Harsha is here. Recently, they've done an entire beautiful research on the impact of the BMTC bus fares on people, and if you reduce the bus fares, you get more revenue. This is a point that the transport agencies don't seem to get at all.
For commuters like Sarma, there are a couple of things which make it mandatory for them to continue to avail the public transport mode. Safety being one of the first and foremost. Post-COVID, there will be, of course, the fear of traveling in public transport. So if there is a fear, then there is one part of it which you can do by wearing a mask, but then there's the other part of it with the bus transport service authorities have to provide that is more cleaner and sanitized buses. Apart from that, there is a factor of waiting time in bus stands. Most of these people, they have to wait in the bus stands for a very, very long time. So if the government does a proper OD survey of knowing which are the heavy routes which require more number of buses, that is something very, very important for this kind of users to continue to use.
I feel like there's a whole need to actually make people visible on the streets. And I wonder if there's a campaign to kind of shift this, especially for urban India and middle class India, to start seeing people on bicycles and not just completely kind of ignoring them, because most people on bicycles who use it for utility are poor people. So there's a complete invisibility around people who use non-motorized ways of transportation. And I think there's a huge need to kind of make that visible so that we start to then shift behavior as well.
Yeah, I think I'm very glad that in this particular photograph, it's not a photo of a bridge and it's actually an at-grade crossing. I would have loved a refuge island for people, if, for example, he couldn't cross the entire stretch and he wanted to stop by in the middle, like that would be great. A thing that I'd like to add is that many cities are doing pilots, but what is essential for our senior citizen to be able to walk across the neighborhood is to have citywide transformation, and for that it's important to embed whatever change that we create through pilots in policies and guidelines. And many cities are doing these things. So Chennai, Pune, I think even Bangalore actually has guidelines and policies that ensure that it's not just one or two pilots, but it is constant transformation that the city decides to make, and that these policies mandate the city to have continuous budgets allocated towards this transformation.
So this is something that Apple and Google have already started to do, including Facebook. They've started to do this across their employees in the US at least, which is if a person travels by cycle to work, they have a methodology to calculate the amount of carbon emissions reduced as a result of taking the cycle, and they compensate for that reduction as a 401k contribution to the employee. And that's a very interesting model, because they are incentivizing these guys to take the cycle. Of course, they have systems in place to verify that this guy is actually cycling.
Sure. I'd say that still the biggest invitation to cycle is to have safe street to cycle. So unless we create fairly extensive, safe and continuous and attractive cycling infrastructure, chances are that Rahul is not going to shift to cycling. So, everything else is good, but to start with, that person needs to feel invited and feel safe.
So as opposed to someone like you, Brikesh, who is a cycling enthusiast, I'm not, but if there was ride sharing cycles more freely available, I would, rather than invest into a bike, when I need on a need basis, I would be able to use those better.
I mean, reinforce some of the pieces that we've already heard. So safe infrastructure is very, very important. And right now, like we spoke about in the case of pedestrians, like we could also use tactical urbanism interventions, which cities across the world are doing in order to have safe cycle lanes, which is not just painted, but also definitely segregated. And some countries like, New Zealand actually have national government funding for these temporary infrastructure. So if we want to get him to start using cycle even sooner than 5 years, we could use measures like those.
My response is both for this scenario as well as the previous one. Everything that we talked about policy, about having active streets, about having more pedestrian-friendly streets for senior citizens, looking at re-envisioning the built form for a better vehicle management in terms of parking. All of this can be undone by one stroke of a pen unless it is embedded and committed in a legal document. And the argument I'm making is, for far too long, master plans in India have no metrics associated with it. Whether you take the development plan of Mumbai or whether you take the master plan, the revised master plan from Bangalore that's coming up for revision now, or the Chennai master plan that's still getting revised now, it completely lacks metrics of what the master plan vision period will achieve. And because when it is committed in that, then the court of law will uphold and will hold the agencies responsible for that particular delivery of the master plan commitment on the ground. Now, whether it is reducing road fatalities, as you rightly put up last time, Rajesh, Bangalore has the third highest road fatalities. Like Amit said, can we get the 0-0-0 vision as part of the master plan? Because then everything has to tie in to achieve that vision. And the vision need not be only the 0-0 or the 0-0, but it can talk about more tangible metrics. And that is completely missing in all planning processes across cities in India. Even the best of plans in Delhi and Mumbai lack that, because the minute you put it in a legal document and it is ratified and notified, then the government is responsible for it. It is responsible for delivery. It does not matter if only the municipal corporation of Mumbai is responsible for the DP. It goes across agencies because it is a legally binding document then. I think that really is missing, and we need to find a way, these kinds of instruments, to make legally tangible metrics that are embedded within our planning documents, which have then a case, because then we as advocates and people who are helping the cities on the ground, we can then use that legal instrument to say, hey, you committed to this. It is very difficult for government to undo a commitment, but it's very easy for them to undo a policy document.
Just legal documents are, in my opinion, insufficient. They're important, but they're insufficient. And therefore, campaigns to change how people think about it and implementing things so they can see for themselves the success of it, documenting the success, making it more publicly available. These are extremely important. Just policies won't do.
But I think there is value in looking at how do you actually decentralize some of this push that actually, that brings in people who are most impacted, people who live around certain areas, to really participate in the kinds of reforms they want to see in their neighborhoods. So really going down to the RWA levels in cities like Delhi, for RWAs to really get involved in mapping their neighborhoods in terms of how they would like to see traffic congestions lowered, but of course through a sort of an inclusive lens. And I think there's a lot of potential to do that work within a very grassroots community level engagement, where we get people to do the mapping, where we get people to start pushing with their local governance bodies, and we start to kind of build this larger consensus around the kind of changes they would like to see. And of course, you start small, and there's, but if many of these RWAs kind of start to do it, there could be potentially a citywide change that we could see.
Yeah, I think so. Very interesting kind of conversation going on. I think one of the things that we have seen is that probably the easiest thing to do in a city is to create a policy. Now, whether it is a non-motorized transport policy, an urban transport policy, or a parking policy, or TOD policy, and because that's the most easiest thing to do. But I think policies don't usually translate on ground in terms of the action. And so if you really want some action on ground, I think policies are important, but that's not going to give us the desired impact. So what do we need? I think one is definitely we need some legal backing, right? So whether it is an act or a master plan, as Sanjay was saying, and if there is some legal backing, then there is action on ground. Second, what we have seen is that if there is some funding tied to certain things. So if there is a funding, then and that acts as a carrot, and then cities are then kind of they move forward to kind of tap the funding and do things on ground, even which they will not do in a usual course of things. And third, very importantly, is if there is some on-ground demand. So whether it is citizen activism, a pressure group, or demand from people, that also kind of makes things happen on ground.